right now, obviously, the U.S. and China are engaged in this negotiation to figure out some somewhat stable coming back from Liberation Day. What is the most positive, plausible story of what comes out of this?
Well, my expectations for this are very low um, because I think the basic problem here is that we have on the U.S. side, we have a sort of a collection of grievances and complaints that have not coalesced into a very coherent agenda of what we want from ourselves and what we want from China. And if you don't know what you yourself want and you don't know what you want from the other party, it's very hard to engage in a constructive negotiation. So I think that's my fundamental take on where we are right now. To me, what we should be, so this is a normative statement, what we should be aiming for is trying to figure out what are the terms of coexistence between the U.S. and China in the coming years and decades. The most desirable outcome would be some kind of an agreement under which we create a broader permission structure for Chinese companies to invest in the United States in a lot of these key industries that we're talking about. I think that's good for the United States because I think it is reasonable for us to try and rebuild certain aspects of our industrial manufacturing system. I think we let those atrophy too much. So selectively, I think it does make sense for us to try and rebuild that. And rebuilding that, should incorporate the best anywhere in the world. And some of that is now coming from China. And I also think just in terms of enhancing mutual understanding and getting better communication channels, investment is even more than trade, is a very good communication channel because it forces you to go to the other guy's place and put down roots there and figure out how things work and figure out ways to communicate with one another. Now, the obstacles to that are enormous, both because of the U.S. narrative that this is intrinsically unsafe and because, I think the Chinese will be very reluctant to allow a lot of their technology high flyers to go and set up in the U.S. and risk having their technology leak away there too. So I'm not saying that is easy or achievable. It's certainly not in a few months. This would be over the course of a year or two or three. You might be able to negotiate some terms of engagement there, right? I mean, the big problem I think that China creates for the world as a whole right now is this fact that they just are unwilling or unable to generate enough domestic demand to keep their own economy running at full steam. That's bad for their own economy, and it creates a lot of friction in the rest of the world because what it then means is that companies that can't sell in China are forced to export their surplus production, and this creates, rising trade frictions, not just with the United States, but with lots and lots of countries. And it does sort of contribute to the narrative that China is not really all that interested in creating a situation where everyone benefits from their growth. It's much more of we're in this for ourselves. So I think it would be helpful for the world economy, helpful for the Chinese people, and helpful for general, stability if the Chinese could recognize that they need to do a lot more to promote the demand side of their economy. It can't just all be about endless investments in new technologies. And I think they're coming to a point where they may be forced into that because if you look at most of the metrics that I and my team follow of, return on investment in China, they're going down, right? The number of zombie companies that, still exist, but, don't even generate enough revenue to pay the interest cost on their debt, that's going up. There's a lot of pressure that's building within the Chinese system because of this obsessive concern with the supply side of the economy. So they'll continue to do, I think, quite well overall in technology production, but the financial constraints are rising. So they, I think, have some self-interest here in coming up with a more balanced economic model and having some pressure from the outside to get them in that direction. I think that would be good. But I guess the final point I would make on this, though, is on the U.S. side, which is, of course, where I generally sit, it really is critical to have a realistic understanding of what's happening in China and how they're interacting with the rest of the world. So I think one of the big dangers that we have in the current Trump administration strategy in this, which was also to some degree apparent in the Biden administration strategy, was there is this belief that China can be contained and that you can essentially construct an alliance of countries that will stand up to China and try to constrain it with you. It's kind of a replay or a dusting off of the Cold War playbook where you had Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, you had the United States and NATO and all of the informal allies everywhere else, and you had the blocs against each other, and the bigger and more economically productive bloc won, right? And that is just not going to work because the Chinese have seen this coming for a long time. They have long had the view that the U.S. was going to try and constrain them. And they said, well, how do we get around this? And their answer is not, you build a bloc, I'll build a bloc against that. Their answer is, I will operate so that it is impossible for you to build the bloc that you want. So you look at China's international engagements, more countries have China as their number one trade partner than any other country in the world, right? 140 countries trade more with China than they do with the United States, which was not true during the Cold War. So if you go to Southeast Asia, you go to Latin America, and you say, how would you like to join our anti-China alliance? They will say, no way. This makes no sense for me. I import a lot of my industrial inputs from China, a lot of my consumer goods. This is really a critical relationship. I might have some concerns about the trade balance and blah, 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 but I am not going to go up against this country that is now either my number one or my number two economic partner, certainly on the trade side and increasingly on the investment side. So that is a non-viable strategy. It will never work. China has integrated itself into the global economy very successfully. And this is just like a fact that we need to live with. So we need to have a more a strategy that recognizes this is a reality, that there are a lot of strengths that the U.S. has to bear if it's willing to, play them, and that we have the advantages of a dynamic system and, frankly, a lot more sort of creativity and flexibility in our financial system than the Chinese do. So it's perfectly possible to come up with a coexistence scenario in which we do really well. We have domestic policies that sort out our own imbalances, both economic and social. And we have a significant degree of engagement with China that is competitive, but hopefully can be bounded so that we don't wind up in a hot conflict situation, which would be the worst of all possible worlds.
If you enjoyed this clip, you can watch the full episode here and subscribe for more clips. Thanks.